On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Brian Hosie. He is the SVP of Engineering at Lendio. We're going to be talking about the impact of adding more developers, adding more processes to your development team. Brian mentioned adding sand in the gears, and I thought that really stood out. And I think there's going to be an interesting episode to hear Brian's thoughts on managing the team, the process, the QA philosophy. Brian, thanks for being on the podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I know I mentioned you're the SVP of Engineering at Lendio. I always like guests to start off with two things. One, let us know what Lendio does, let them know the high level, and then also what are your responsibilities as the SVP of Engineering?
Sure. So Lendio is the largest online marketplace for small business lending in the US. We facilitate an application process that allows small business owners, Main Street mom and pop type businesses to secure funding or additional, sources of capital for their business. And we do so with a high touch, high technology based solution. We have around 75 lenders on our platform, and we match them up to the best opportunity to help that business owner grow their business. My responsibilities at Lendio as the SVP of Engineering is all of our engineers, whether it's application engineers, DevOps, infrastructure, data engineering, machine learning engineers, the whole gamut all report up through me. And, we're here to help our business succeed.
Awesome. Excited about this episode. And to kind of set the stage, we're going to talk about, what happens when you add more developers. You have to add more processes to keep things moving. And it seems like more art than science, to be honest with you. But at the highest level at Lendio, how are teams managed? Is it Agile Scrum? Is it another methodology? That'd be just a great starting point.
Sure. So we have all of the teams organized into cross-functional squads, typically 3 to 4 engineers with one product manager and one UX designer. And all of those teams are highly autonomous, have a ton of ownership over their different area of the business. And rather than organizing around, traditionally code bases and repos or whatever, we organize them around functional areas of the business or revenue generating areas of the business. And this really lets them go deep in a particular area of the business and, be that mechanism to help our business grow in that area. We utilize a highly modified version of Agile, and it's not Scrum, it's not Kanban, but we take principles from each of those. We work kind of in a very iterative cycle, much like a lean startup methodology, and work on projects that are important to the business.
Awesome. I like it, especially, around the revenue generating parts of the business. I think that's an interesting way to align teams. And I guess, you guys have kind of taken principles across different methodologies and you have a highly customized process system that works for the team. I guess when you're looking at the processes you have in place, obviously you guys have been growing pretty quickly. And as you add more developers, as the teams get bigger, you have to have some moments where you stop and see if things are working, or potentially you don't. You let things go and address them as they kind of come up. But what is the overall philosophy for you as teams are growing? Are you checking processes and health of processes as you're going, or is it, hey, let something break and then address it once it does?
We've had a significant amount of growth in the last couple of years with our product and engineering team. We've gone from around 20 engineers and a couple of product managers as recently as 2018. And we're now an organization of 120. We have just over 70 engineers on staff and product managers for each of our 20 plus different product teams. And so as we've grown, many of the processes that work when you're 15, maybe 20 individuals working in the business, those processes start to break down, when you get to the size and so that we're currently at. And so for us, it's been, how do we continue to maintain a high level of autonomy and maintain speed to market and speed to shipping product, but doing so safely when you have, a significantly larger team. And I believe most companies that are about our size or teams that are about our size, this is an inflection point for those teams to where traditionally you start to add a little bit more process, and that process starts to slow things down a little bit more, and you create a lot of safety, but you lose the speed aspect. And so, as we're inspecting, that's the number one thing that we try to focus on is we want to continue to be safe in our building and deploying a product, but we can't lose our speed.
Gotcha. Maybe it'd be nice to define. I like how you use the word safely. And then also we talk about speed. So the next question there probably is around technical debt. And, how does the team view it just, as the years have been going by? Are you viewing it as a positive thing? I've heard some engineering managers mention, hey, if used carefully, it is a good thing. Some people avoid it like the plague. Some are at the behest of sales, and sometimes you have to just live with it just to get product out. But how does the team overall look at that balance of, producing code safely, within good margins, but also avoiding or having to use technical debt?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question in two parts. So as far as creating additional safety, it's really around, you'll notice when we talked about how the teams are structured, I didn't mention QA engineer, and that's very intentional. Our developers own the QA process, and really the whole team, including the project managers, owns the QA process. And that includes writing the automated tests, shipping their features out to production, monitoring those features as well, and really taking ownership. We try to treat each of these teams like a small startup. And oftentimes, small startups, you ship code or you die as a business. You get features to market and you do it quickly. Otherwise, those paychecks may not clear in the future. And so, oftentimes you hire engineers as your first hire, and you're making the decision between whether you hire a QA engineer and whether you hire a software engineer. And oftentimes you choose more engineers because you want to ship more code out there. And so it creates, a situation where people have to wear many hats. We think that's an inherently a good thing. The second part to your question around technical debt, we've kind of turned to a different phrase. We call it TAD at Lendio, or technical asset development. And although we're really talking about technical debt, it's really important when we're talking with, others in the business and stakeholders and whatnot to create a positive experience. These are assets that run a very successful business, and we have nothing to apologize for. They are an asset to us. And because it's an asset, we want to maintain and improve it. And so each of our teams is responsible for spending up to 50% of their planned time towards TAD, or technical asset development. So that's including, bug fixes, upgrades, maintenance, and everything like that. We also have a concept around what we call service intervals. And much like your car, if you never change the oil, if you never rotate the tires or even stop to fill up for gas, you don't get very far down the road, and you're probably buying a new car every 2 or 3 years. And so we have the equivalent of a monthly oil change on our code base. We have the equivalent of a 30 or 60,000 mile service. And, we set time aside in the calendar every quarter and every year to do things like framework upgrades and, language upgrades and getting to the latest LTS, so that we're never out of date and we're not having to buy a new car every couple of years.
Cool. I guess just to kind of touch on that, when you mentioned, developers owning the QA process. So if you were to kind of help peel back the onion on that and go back to maybe an earlier team or how that potentially started, obviously you decide to make the decision, you hire more developers, you're trying to ship more product, all that makes sense. Who implements the QA framework? Do you bring in expertise to help implement it, or is it just developers with their own previous experience are implementing the best QA process they know?
Yeah. So when you're a smaller company, and this began when we were a much smaller team, it is from previous experience. You hire folks that kind of have that aptitude and that interest in testing and testing philosophy, and, finding the right balance between automated tests and manual tests. There are some developers, some engineers who love to, build a feature and be able to toss that feature over the wall to somebody else to, test and find the bugs and whatnot. And so that's something that we really look for in our interviewing process, is somebody who wants to have, ownership over the entire process, somebody who comes from more of a startup background where you have fewer resources. And so you have to get creative around how you build and deploy product out.
And one thing to note, I was going to just, obviously people can look you up on LinkedIn, but if they're listening to the podcast, you've been at Lendio for a while. So you have seen firsthand the maturation. I think when you and I first spoke, you were about 1/6 the size when you first joined. So you have very, very, I guess, intimate views in terms of how the company's matured. And now you're obviously the SVP of engineering. So I think that was kind of interesting to hear from the context of when you were hiring early on, trying to hire the can you wear multiple hats. I guess as you guys have moved through the years and been maturing, QA is still owned by developers. Are you still looking at developers building out their own QA process, or is there going to be a tipping point to bring in, QA people or potentially someone who just sets up or manages the process or the framework and kind of has other teams work with it?
Yeah, so we are continuing to move forward with this small team structure and not having dedicated, what I call traditional, QA engineers on the team. But one thing that we'll be adding early in 2022 is starting to build out a test engineer paradigm. So, as our code bases have gotten bigger, as the features have gotten more complex, really bringing on expertise around building out great testing frameworks, how to go about testing the right things, which things should be automated versus which things should be manual, and really helping the individual developers on each of the teams to write, tests that are efficient and effective, and test the right things. Not all the things, but test the things that are most important to the business.
And I guess, as you're kind of talking about, some of the growth, and you mentioned, I guess, a couple of minutes ago about, the team slowing down. How do you manage, I guess, as the team does slow down and you add a bit more process, how do you manage the, I guess, quote unquote, velocity being maintained or kind of, meeting the goals of product management and some of their, milestones and what you need to do?
So the way we handle, deadlines, working with stakeholders, working in product management, is we set a very high level strategy that we want to accomplish at the business. And then we turn that over to our individual product teams. And they really do work together in a cross-functional capacity to figure out the roadmap that makes sense to go solve that problem. Very rarely does our leadership team, say we need to launch this specific feature or we need to launch something by this specific date. It's all around, defining outcomes, defining the smallest iteration or the smallest idea that we can test and pushing it out there as quickly as possible and validating the result.
Awesome. And I guess as you're seeing the team mature and you're kind of forecasting out, let's say, the next couple of years of development, if you had to kind of use your spidey senses, is much going to change as you add the next, couple hundred people? Are you pretty comfortable that the current, I guess, the process of, obviously the developers own a lot of the ownership of the developers, really, is that going to hold true, or do you anticipate having to make some, I guess, structural changes as you guys are growing?
There will always be, I think, additional changes, additional structural changes, but this concept of as we get bigger, a small team operating in the company as a mini startup, really owning from top to bottom a specific area of the business. I really do believe that this can scale out, will continue to scale out. I'm also, fully under the impression that this is going to go great or it's going to totally blow up in our face at some point. But I'm excited to see what happens. And, I think that the chaos that could potentially be created by, the way that we decide to organize is definitely much more interesting than putting in traditional processes that, you see across the enterprise that in so many ways prevent you from delivering value quickly out to customers.
Sure. And I guess when you look at hiring for the team, obviously you mentioned looking for certain types of people that fit, the team structure that you guys have set up. When you guys are looking to hire and you're kind of evaluating people to come in, is the structure you have where developers are, very heavily invested in the ownership and outcome? Are you finding people being able to embrace and adjust quickly if they're coming from environments where that's not the norm? Or is there a period of adjustment that somebody needs to go through to kind of get comfortable with how you guys do things?
Yeah, there's definitely a period of adjustment. We call it the corporate detox. And, it's part of why we definitely do look at kind of the startup market. We interview product managers and engineers who are used to working in smaller companies, who are used to quite a bit of ambiguity, who will be able to retain the level of autonomy that they're used to, but have a little bit more confidence in kind of the long-term growth and trajectory of the company. So all of the excitement and minimizing the risk of what you would typically find in a startup. And yeah, we do find that, folks that come from kind of more of a traditional enterprise corporate background who may be looking for just that list of Jira tickets that they can, go crank out every day and punch in and punch out. And they know exactly what they're going to be working on every day. They do tend to get a little frustrated at Lendio because we definitely do have each of the teams operating with a high level of autonomy and really figuring out, what are the right problems to go solve and how to go do that.
That's a very valid point. I think what's interesting is sometimes you find the technical skill set, put the person through the interview and can't hire because they're not going to thrive in that environment. They're going to come in and there's going to be that frustration level. And while the technical boxes are checked, you're like, well, I don't think this individual is it's just not going to be a good experience for them or the company.
Yeah, absolutely right. And, just touching on our hiring process real quick, we actually don't do any sort of, coding interview, whiteboard interview, or anything like that. Everything in our interviewing process is around, situations and more of a situational interviewing style. We talk deeply about, past projects that they've worked in, problems that they solved, and we really focus on, can that person tie the project that they built to, long-term success of the company? If there's a disconnect there, then, that's something that we really think long and hard about before we bring somebody onto the team.
I'm kind of curious because I know every company does things differently, their interview processes, but you guys are doing more situational interviewing. What's the core code that you guys are using as a part of that situational interviewing process?
So yeah, with our particular code base, we're heavily invested in modern PHP. So we're using, at this point, we're at PHP 8. We're primarily backed on Laravel, and our front end applications are in UJS and Angular, and we also have a heavy amount of Python as well. So a little bit of everything and lots of interesting things to work on.
Awesome. I love the fact that developers are given a ton of decision-making, capabilities, the autonomy behind it. I think it's got to be a great place to work. And if somebody wants to ping you about anything Lendio related, what's a good way of getting hold of you? Is LinkedIn a good place to reach out, or what's a good way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is the best way. I am definitely absent from social media in general, but I do check in on LinkedIn every once in a while. So that'd be the best place.
All right. Awesome. We'll make sure to include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And if anyone does want to follow up, feel free to reach out to Brian out there. He'll get back to you. Thanks for being on, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for chatting. I thought this was really awesome.
Great. Thank you, Amir. It's been great to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again with a different guest, a different topic. I always ask for two things. One, if you found the podcast valuable, share it with someone. That's how it's been growing, and I appreciate everyone that does. And secondly, if you want me to talk about a specific topic, feel free to reach out to me and let me know what that is, and I'll do my best to find the right person. Until next time, goodbye.